You're listening to the Zealous Podcast. I'm Rocky Snyder. This week I've invited Todd Wright, the Vice President of Player Performance for the Los Angeles Clippers, to come on and share a little bit about what he's doing. He also happens to be a fellow Perform Better presenter. So if you're not familiar with Perform Better Summits, they will be coming in person again this year. And you'll be able to connect with Todd either in Providence, Chicago, or Orlando. I hope you enjoy the show. You know, I've been listening to you for a while, Todd, and how that has happened, of course, is going to the Perform Better summits, and of course, the last couple of years have been online, but before that, it was in person, and thoroughly always enjoyed your lectures. So, first of all, do you have a topic that you're going to be presenting on this year? Have you decided what that is? And also, how did you get involved with Perform Better? I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah, you know what? I haven't picked a topic yet. I have asked and requested to potentially do the Providence location with Chris. And, you know, over the years, Chris Poirier, who's the general manager of Perform Better, has done such a great job growing this educational series that, you know, he just has so many speakers now year after year. And so I do have my request in to potentially do Providence, and I haven't picked the topic yet. But how I originally got into it was Chris Poirier and I had met a long time ago. And even all the way back to when I was at Clemson, I was in my, mid 20s. He was my major provider for equipment. I had just always used him. And then I think it might have been around 2001 or 2002. He had a speaker cancel at the last second, and he's like, "Hey, would you consider doing this?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And at the time I was just I was a disciple of Gary Gray's Applied Functional Science, and I was coming across these discoveries with some of my athletes that were a little outside the box than what was getting talked about at that time. And so I kind of rolled the dice, and I kind of basically just got up and told the story of how I had made some mistakes with some of these players and how it tripped me into looking at training and the human body a little differently. It made me change the glasses at which I looked at. And it actually went pretty well. And then Chris just asked me back every year after that. And it's been a lot of fun because, number one, you've been to them, right, Rocky? Like, everybody's there to, number one, get better. But there's some really good speakers on the tour that you could really get better in a short amount of time. It's really a functionally dense seminar,
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's been a real cool experience,
Yeah, before we started going on the air here, we found out we got so many things in common. We both grew up, we're just 2 towns away from each other. We moved away from New England in the 90s, but my family's up on the coast of New Hampshire in a town I was raised in the summertime, which is where your wife is from. And then these common bonds keep on going because I also studied with Dr. Gray and the Gray Institute, CAFS and 3D maps and whatnot. And it was at a time where it was helping to change the lens in which I was looking at strength and conditioning also. So I'm curious because what I ran into, and I'm wondering if you did the same thing, is talking to others in the field that hadn't gone through information quite like that, understanding how there's a joint reaction throughout the entire body. When one thing moves, everything moves, and how that affects conditioning and training. When it came to coaches and physical therapists also and athletic trainers, it sometimes felt like I just am using the wrong words to get my point across because they are giving me this blank stare, like you're just speaking a different language. How was that for you? And if that occurred, how is it now? And has there been a change?
Well, to your point, that the applied functional science can be overwhelming, and the ability to take that and deliver it to an audience a particular audience, right? Sometimes it's an athlete, sometimes it's other coaches. And I was really lucky when I was started to take in Gary's information. And I was lucky in this sense. I had an internship program at the University of Texas, and I had 4 or 5 master's students that were interning with me. And so a lot of the stuff that I really struggled with in the early beginnings of applied functional science, I was able to bring it back and throw it on a table with 4 or 5 other guys. And we would just mosh through it.
Nice.
And then that's where I think we were able to, cipher through some of how we could say this in a way that maybe someone could understand it. And so it was a lot of real good conversations going back and forth between these 4 or 5 people. And then, truth be known, I went back to Gary's I went to Gary's first chain reaction seminar in, I think it was 1999. It was my first year at Texas. And I went to one in Raleigh, and I really didn't know, I was really overwhelmed. But I could tell that what he was saying was, there was some real truth to it. And it was outside the box of really, as a traditional strength and conditioning coach, that you just really hadn't heard these things. So with the combination of those 4 or 5 guys, and then me going back every year, and the one thing that I've been able to hang my hat on a little bit is that I've been really humbled to be able to ask questions when I don't know what's going on. And so those times where I was sitting in a room, my first seminar with Gary, I think there were 46 physical therapists, and there was 1 strength and conditioning coach. And he was talking about chain reaction of the foot and the calcaneus and the subtalar joint. And that was like Chinese for me at that point. And so I just raised my hand and said, hey, like, what is the subtalar joint? And he stopped the seminar and showed me where it was. And Gary was really gracious. I was really lucky to have a teacher like that. But it just empowered me to keep raising my hand when I didn't understand. And so, like, I always use the phrase, like, I know what I know and I know what I don't know, but I really want to know what I don't know. And that's kind of driven me through my career, even to this point. If there's something that I don't understand, I'm just not afraid to really ask it, because my mind really wants to know how to get better in that space.
And where is that mind taking you right now? Because you've gone through obviously everything that we just discussed, but there's so much out there. I mean, we're like in a sea of information and trying to navigate this way or that. Where is your ship taking you? Where is your compass pointing?
Yeah, well, this transition for me, by trade, I've been a strength and conditioning coach for 25 plus years, all the way through my journey. After I left the University of Texas in 2015, I was fortunate enough to get into the NBA, and my first stop was with the Philadelphia 76ers as a head of strength and conditioning, but I was an assistant coach. Also, I was a little bit of a hybrid. But my journey now with the Clippers has moved me into a little bit more of a leadership role. And so I have to be able to acquire some different skills and be able to hire great people that they're super curious. And so it's actually cool right now that I have an amazing staff, and that are really, they're growth mindset people, that they're always wanting to get better. And so every day there's something that's coming to the table that can help us evaluate our athletes or monitor our athletes. And the science to this, as Coach, it's really evolved in the last 10 years, and it's really exploding even more now. And so I'm lucky that I'm around a bunch of different people that are bringing so many different ideas to the table, whether it's, tendon loading or, intrinsic foot development, to BFR, to, anything that could help our athletes find a way to perform at a higher level. So for 25 years, I was really on the hunt of to find any kind of skill to help engineer a better athlete. Now I'm really fortunate that I'm leading, and I have a group of people that are bringing ideas every day, and I'm learning from those people. So the one constant variable of the common denominator is I've really enjoyed understanding how to help people be better, and I'm really curious. And now I'm in an environment that I have amazing people around me that are just bringing so many different ideas to the table.
So you speak of getting people to their optimal level of performance, and we're talking about world-class athletes in the NBA. Of course, LA Clippers, great team as an example of it. But you always have the likelihood of injury. And at one point in time, if you recall, like the 90s, when we were having so much support around the high top shoes and everything, there was this high incident rate of ankle inversions, sprains, high hamstring pulls, and so on. And then realizing that there was too much support in one area and that the body needed to do more work. Fast forward to today, like in terms of returning players that were injured to the sport and trying to reduce the likelihood of injury, what have been the big ticket items for you? Like in the last 5 years, the last 5 to 10 years, what are the things that your team and maybe across the NBA or professional sports are really starting to dive in and look at compared to where we were, say, 15, 20 years ago?
No, I think that, Gary's applied functional science, it's very principally driven, right? Like you had mentioned it earlier in the podcast that, that the body moves integratively. It interacts in a chain reaction way. When the foot hits the ground, a chain reaction happens to the entire body, but it's three-dimensionally driven. It was probably at the Perform Better seminar, I was sitting in one of Thomas Meyer's talks.
Mm-hmm.
And so Thomas Myers was the first one to really start to introduce the concept of fascia, connective tissue. And I remember, being in his talk, and he had a tensegrity model, and so you just said it great. Like there's these shoes that could create restriction in one area. And if you look at the concept of this tensegrity model, which our body is, that where our bones are floating in this tension and compression type of connective tissue, right? And that if you have a restriction in one particular area, it could affect other areas through this tensegrity model. And Gary had taught me that early with a player that I had I had a low back issue with a guy that I was really struggling to figure out. And I asked Gary, this was probably my third year after doing applied functional science. We had a really good team at Texas. And I said, Gary, I have this really good player. His back's hurting him. And can I fly him out to see you? He said, sure. So I fly him to Colorado at one of his chain reaction seminars, and him and Dave Tiberio, for those that aren't familiar with applied functional science, Dave Tiberio is, they're right hand and left hand to each other. And so I bring this kid, and they asked to take his shirt off, and then take his shoes off. And he tells the kid to walk across the room. And as he walks across the room, he's like, well, you could see his left calcaneus is inverted. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure where you're going with this right now, because his back hurts. And he's like, he comes walking back, and he says, see his right arm's not swinging. And I said, well, I've always noticed that when he runs, he locks his right arm up by his side. He goes, well, that's because of that left calcaneus. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, it's his back, Gary. Like, and I'm actually pretty frustrated, and yeah, right. And so Gary's like, and if you haven't met Gary Gray, he's like, he's calm and composed and put together. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, you're telling me that because that left heel's bent over that his back's hurting? He's like, exactly. And I said, you gotta teach me this. And so he teaches me, as the foot hits the ground, the calcaneus, it everts, and then the talus falls down and in, and the tib fib internally rotate, the femur internally rotates. Well, the pattern that we were seeing in this kid is because that calcaneus was locked, basically the trigger to the gun, the chain reaction biomechanics on the left side of his body wasn't happening very well. And so when that left leg was back in gait and he was running, if he threw the right arm back, it would create that diagonal pull through his shirt, through his pelvis, he would go right through his spine if he threw the right arm back. So he had this built-in mechanism to lock the arm down to prevent that he didn't hurt his back. Sure enough, Gary teaches me how to mobilize the subtalar joint and teaches me how to put him into these transformational zones, gets that right arm swinging, something that we had struggled to fix for, 4 to 6 months, we had cleared up in, less than 4 weeks. And we went on to the Final Four that year and had a great run. And this kid actually broke the all-time rebounding record in Texas history.
Wow.
So all of a sudden that opens my eyes up. And then I'm learning Thomas Myers, this tensional integrity. And so then you start, diving into, Schleip and Stecco, and you really start to learn the architecture to this connective tissue and how it's three-dimensionally driven. It looks like a web. It looks like a spider web. And according to the mechanical loads that we put into it, that collagen lays down lines of reinforcement through mechanotransduction. So now all of a sudden I'm like, this is really eye-opening to me. And then I'm lucky I have a couple other players, a kid that comes to me that potentially could have went to the NBA out of high school, and we find he's got a spondylolisthesis in the lumbar spine, and we find that he has an HV bunion on one side of his foot that he can't basically dorsiflex that big toe. And so for that reason, when the right foot comes off in the back, he has to toe it open. So his pelvis comes back flying twice as fast on that side. He breaks the facets in that area and gets the slippage in the lumbar spine area. Something that this kid struggled with, we had cleaned up in like 6 to 7 weeks. So now all of a sudden, this combination of these two sciences now my glasses really start to change. I'm putting them down, I'm putting them back on. But a long way around to answer your question, we want to create a system that, number one, we can identify where the tension is in that tensegrity system, right? And so when athletes come in, we want to put them through an evaluation, and we really want to examine 3 big parts of the body. Number 1, the foot. Number 2, the hip. And number 3, the trunk. And so how the thoracic spine can work in space 3-dimensionally. And I think that if you have an athlete that is clean in those 3 areas, I'm simplifying it a little bit, right? But those are the big buckets. Those are the big transducers of the transverse plane of motion, the rotational plane. And so past injuries, surgeries, you have to go through that connective tissue. And so that the tension that's created in that area is significant. And that's why the forces will be distributed differently, through the entire body. So we want to put the athlete through a test to be able to check, can they load their ankles and feet, their hips, and their thoracic spine? But if they had past injuries, we really put a premium on people that have high level soft tissue skills. And so the ability to go in where that tissue is really restricted and start to hydrate it again. And so, the 3 biggest components to connective tissue are, number 1, it's viscous, right? And so it has the ability to get adhesive or very lubricant-like. And so we're lucky that we have a lot of skilled practitioners that can put their hands on there and break the viscosity up, that it can be more lubricant-like. The soft tissue has an elastic component. And so we want to be able to recondition injuries to be able to handle that elastic component in 3-dimensionally, so that net gets reinforced and creates a real robust connective tissue. And then the last piece to connective tissue is that it's plastic. It's very adaptable, and it can resist deformation, right? Its tensile strength is incredible in it. And so we just want to be able to condition it every day three-dimensionally, that web has the elasticity to it, and we break up that tension, and then put it into the major movement programs that basketball players have to perform at. And then we want to submaximally load those things so we can restore function back in. And so that's a long way around. That's a long way around your question, but hopefully I answered it.
Oh, you did. You just, every word you said was like I was drinking it in, like the most delicious nectar I've found. Honestly, it was fantastic. There's just so much, like it makes my heart skip a beat to know that this is occurring at the level at the NBA. Because truth be told, I've had several guests on from different fields of sports and different areas of specialty, and they kind of skip over a lot of what you just said. And there's still many out there that are very symptom based in terms of their approach, or very isolated in terms of their approach. Like, we've got a protocol for inversion sprains, we've got a protocol for high hamstring pulls, we've got a protocol for rotator cuff stuff. And those are just symptoms of mismanagement of the mass of a person's body and the ability to create force, to decelerate it, to deal with gravity, and all of these things that you are very familiar with. But it seems like there's missing ingredients. So to hear you describe the way in which you take this approach is just so wonderful. I do have a question when it comes to the manual therapists. Like, do you go along with structural integration? Because Tom Myers out of Walpole, Maine, there, another New Englander, he's obviously very much a Rolfer. He was trained by Ida and one of her disciples. So do you look for Rolfers or structural integration, or do you do other modalities like NKT or PDTR, or do you go with Posture Restoration Institute, PRI stuff? Is there one modality, or is it just a smattering of all these Swedish deep tissue sports and so on?
Well, I think you want to have diversity within that skill set, right? Like, you want to be able to look at it in a bunch of different views. But we're really lucky that we work with an organization that ownership and our leadership group really values the medical and performance side. And so we're a little bit fortunate in the sense that our ownership and our leadership group have allowed us to create a team that have these skills, right? And a lot of NBA teams don't quite see it that way. But the ability to have your hands on that tissue and feel gives you a different input and different information system that, as these people are working, they can feel the tension in particular parts of the body that they can give to the other stakeholders in the space, that we can start to attack those things a little bit locally, meaning, not gravity driven. And we could start on a little bit of an isolative area to attack that, and then put it globally upright, where gravity and ground reaction force and mass momentum of the body have to be integrated in the entire chain reaction. But we're really lucky that we work for an organization that has entrusted the leadership in our space to develop our team that way. But we have a great soft tissue practitioner, Lenny Parasino, and Maggie Bryant. Yeah, right. And Maggie Bryant and Jesse Phillips, and Jason Powell is our head athletic trainer. All these guys have these skill sets, and so there's, on top of John Meyer of Meyer Institute of Sport, who oversees the entire program, there's a lot of really skilled people with their hands.
I had no idea Lenny was on your team either. That's great.
Yeah, yep. And so to be able to learn from this diverse group has created a very unique high performance dynamic for us. Yeah. And we're blessed that we have that support from the ownership and the leadership group that run our program.
All right, that's fantastic. Okay, I want to run something up the flagpole here. We're talking about chain reaction, calcaneal eversion, subtalar internal rotation, and all this stuff, which are basic mechanics of human movement. They are, if we look at the human gait cycle, we will find that there are moments where the foot and the rest of the body has to organize to absorb impact when we land on planet Earth. And for the most part, people will say, oh, that's pronation, but they only refer to it as the foot. But actually, the ankle has to pronate. There's a certain direction and movement that the ankle, and for that matter, the knee and the hip and the pelvis and the spine, and we can go all the way up the chain, so that when that foot hits the ground and we start to absorb the impact and decelerate forces, there is a chain reaction, like you've already said, that goes all the way through every joint. And then within a split second, in less than a second, that changes direction, and the opposite joint actions, the opposite muscle lengthening and shortening have to occur to push off planet Earth, and we would call that supination. Now, those are the most basic building blocks of human movement that I can think of, that we have been doing for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, to the degree that we've been on 2 feet. Now, I say this because now we take that information and we know how the body moves, and you can pick apart different joint actions and see how it affects something up the chain, like a player's low back issue or whatever. You brilliantly describe that. But then you take that player and you say to yourself, which is you load it submaximally, you load these tissues and this action submaximally. But there's so many strength coaches that don't recognize the two basic actions of human movement: pronation mechanics and supination mechanics. And we should be seeing that we should be loading these type of reactions, these joint actions, in the weight room as well, and taking derivations of these. Instead, where do we go with the strength class? And I think you're going to be right beside me here. In the 90s, we were looking at bodybuilding routines. We were looking at powerlifting and Olympic lifting to make up the majority of our strength program.
Right.
So the question is this: how has your information with joint mechanics, gait mechanics, pronation, supination, how has that altered your exercise selection in the gym? Because I know for a fact, for me, I mean, I actually wrote a book on the whole thing, but I want to know, how does it relate to you? Because I've got my own way of doing it.
Sure. You know, and it's a amazing observation on your part of, you know, when you really start to dive into Gary's teachings and you learn how this body is a complete chain reaction when the foot hits the ground, and you start to look at muscle function. That was the biggest thing, that when I started to learn, you know, where the hamstrings are attached and where they insert, and what they actually support in function, right? So as I started to overturn all these truths of the human body, I started to really look at how traditional strength training was performed, right? Now, along with this, I'm just starting to discover this and challenge my thought process, but I'm really lucky that I start to come across some amazing players. Like, I'm lucky I coached 2 national players of the year while I was at Texas, both of them that weren't very good in the weight room, but they were masters of their space. Meaning this, so traditional strength training happens basically straight up and down. You really don't leave the space. But if you look at the game of basketball, these guys, they master the vectors that they move on. And so for those people that, you know, that maybe wouldn't understand the word vectors, if I was standing in the center of a clock and my right foot lunged to 12 or to 2 o'clock or to 3 o'clock or to 4 o'clock, that's where these guys master their space. And so there's certain movement programs that they're really good at, but they're good at using the change of speeds of their bodies to deceive their opponent, to create space. It's where they can execute their skill. And so the combination of Gary and Thomas Myers, and now I have these great players that aren't really traditionally good in the weight room, but have real significant problems, like knee problems, low back problems. If I can keep them healthy and keep them on the floor, they'll be available. So the the paradigm at which I look at training is this: the best players are the best movers. They're the best movers in space. And moving is three-dimensionally driven. So I can move front to back in the sagittal plane, I can move side to side in the frontal plane, and I can move left rotational, right rotational in the transverse plane. Some of those skill sets really were driven at the offensive end of the floor, the ability to get up the floor more vertical, more sagittally plane, sagittal and lateral. But the defensive end of the floor was very transverse plane driven. And then you start to examine, my very first talk with Chris Poria was on the vertical core. And so it was based off of that story, that first story that I had shared with you with the rebounding kid that hurt his back. But what I realized was function is driven from the ground up and the top down. And the in between those two is the core. So every core muscle, there was a commonality to the musculature. All of them hooked in on the pelvis, and all of them hooked in on the rib cage. Transverse abdominis, rectus internal, external oblique. All of them had an attachment on the pelvis and on the rib cage. Well, if you start to look at the ribs wrap around and attach into the thoracic spine. So as the thoracic spine lifts and loads or laterally flexes or rotates, I can create a chain reaction from the top down by using my arms in space or my trunk. But if my legs moved in space and hit the ground, I would create a reaction from the ground up. So now you start to look at that, 6 angulations from the top down, 6 angulations from the ground up. You could keep a really healthy vertical core if you could, build the system based off of those angulations. That just supported how these guys moved in space. And so instead of just getting muscles strong, I looked at it more as, could we really strengthen movement integratively? And through that, we would reinforce the fundamental principles of the connective tissue and mechanotransduction and how to lay down better lines of collagen in that system. But we would create better coordination, right, in these movement patterns. So if we could grow this movement base, they would be able to execute their skills better. They would be able to dribble the ball better. They would be able to pass better. They would be able to shoot at a larger, movement based, the scope of movement at which they would step into a shot. And so instead of just getting strong, I would say strong for what? And so we created these movement training systems instead of just traditionally lifting a body part. I felt like that was a more dense way to look at training, that we could get more accomplished.
I think you're a brother from another mother. The way you're talking right now is fabulous. I mean, and of course, that probably led you to Michel Dalcour and his omnidirectional training with the Vipers, because I can just see you doing that. Like, can I load? Can I accelerate, decelerate? Can I do it in a multiplanar fashion, a uniplanar fashion? Can they control these movements from the top down, from the bottom up? And now, just like you say, we're training the proper strength for the body that's going to be doing the action, rather than just simply training to get stronger. And so there's the crux within in the industry. In some ways, there's still a large camp that seem to be holding on to, we are going to stick to these major lifts and have it be the core ingredient of strength. And then there's this other camp going, well, that's fine. We can probably throw those in a little bit, but that's actually not going to be the core. That may be something that we'll take in as accessories, but really we need the dynamic stability and mobility to occur at the same time, under load, under tempo changes, so that the whole joint chain reactions going to occur with the least amount of restriction when necessary, so that we don't have pent up force vectors blowing out a back, or tweaking a high hamstring, or throwing an ACL into chaos, and so on. Do you agree?
Very well said. Yeah, very well said. And Michel's been an amazing resource for us from the inception of the Viper. It's a big tool with what we do. He has an amazing educational system. that does a great job. I've taken his seminars, and he's become a great friend and a great resource for our programs.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can totally. So, that's one tool, right? And they all are just tools. And I can take a hammer and try and turn it into a screwdriver, but if I don't have the knowledge of how to use the tool and the concepts behind that, then it's almost useless. So it's really getting the understanding of what you're trying to use. So, and you have, it seems, a fabulous understanding of what it is your athletes need. So my question here is, aside from the Viper, what are your other go-to tools? What are the other things? I mean, I can imagine medicine ball, resistance bands to some degree, but are there things out there on the horizon where you're going, oh man, that's good? Whether it's a tube filled with water and shifting all around, or ball bearings, or what? Are there any tools that you're going, this really has been a nice thing to incorporate?
Well, I think anytime that you can create variability in modalities for your athletes, it just allows the motivation to stay at a high level, right? Obviously, you got to pick a modality off the principles of how you would want to execute a particular skill set to develop the athlete. Chris Poirier has been an amazing. I've always been able to venture into his company and to get different products. And, but the OHM has been a good tool. I'm really looking into, we have a Raptor wall that basically, it's the Vertimax system that you could do everything vector-based power-wise. And so we have a whole, med ball series, a med ball wall that's lined with the Raptors on the side, and we have hooks in the middle that we can, hook the guys up and be able to do a lot of horizontal power development. Sled pushes, the tank. Obviously, Kaiser makes great products. We're really lucky that our organization allows us to get the resources that we need to get it done. But mobility stick, the ability to give you some points of stability to get in and out of deeper ranges of motion, the stretch cage, the true stretch, the ankle cradle for calcaneal eversion. A lot of these are big staples for us. But once again, it's the thought process. It should be all principally driven, and then you're going to use this weight to try to enhance or influence that movement pattern in a particular way. And we're lucky that I'm looking over your shoulder, you got the Indian clubs back there, and, another awesome tool, the wet clubs. There's so many great tools out there to help enhance performance.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned earlier too, your approach to assessing players that are coming on. And you mentioned that the foot and ankle you assess the hip, you assess the trunk. I'm curious what's involved with your assessment. And if we could take one at a time, like when you assess the foot ankle, are you doing that in a closed chain as well as an open chain environment? How do you do that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And so I always want to go from local to global. And this is a collaboration of a lot of different people, but when I first met Gary, we'd come up with a system that, when you first get the athlete, you're going to lay him on the table, and I'm going to have a stool at the bottom of the table, and I'm just going to look at the callus patterns on the bottom of the foot, right? And it's going to give us a little bit of a roadmap that if there could be some asymmetrical loading, right? The callus patterns would kind of, so if you see something there, but I want my hands to be able to feel the tension to the foot. And so I would grab the calcaneus and I would, traction the legs to see if there was a leg length discrepancy before we started to move, right? So if you have a shorter leg on the table, could there be a tight hip socket on one side or front to back? But after I tension the legs, I'm going to grab the calcaneus, I'm going to wiggle it side to side to see if it has eversion. And as I evert the calcaneus, I'm kind of looking at the tib-fib joint up the center to see if I'm getting internal rotation as I tug on it. From there, I'm going to go to the mid-tarsal joint. So I'm going to wrap my foot around the mid-tarsal joint to see if we get good frontal plane motion and or see if the arch is really stuck up there really high. And then lastly, I'm going to place my thumb under the first ray, and I'm going to try to take the first ray for a ride and see if it can dorsiflex. And so those are the three major areas that I'm going to look at locally in the foot. And then I'm going to go through a little bit of a table stretch in the 4 quadrants to the hip. So the front hip, the back hip, the medial hip, and the lateral hip. And I'm going to just kind of feel on the table to see if there's an asymmetry from right to left. And then in the trunk, I'm going to lay them on their belly, and I'm just going to track the spine to see if we have any, abnormal curvatures or scoliosis or anything like that. Just look at the shoulder blades to see where they're sitting in that connective tissue area. And just to feel, palpate that area to see if there's any tension in that area. So that kind of gives me a feel for if I felt any asymmetries with my hands. And then we're going to put them upright, watch them walk and gait, and see how the chain reaction mechanics start. We're looking for shoulder height, symmetrical arm swings, a butt cheek that comes flying back twice as fast as the other one, right? Like you'll see if there's a tight hip as they move, that hip that comes back will come flying back much different than the other one. So we'll walk in a bunch of different manners, toes in, crossover walk, just to, we're going to influence the system by changing the gait patterns. We're going to squat them in all 3 planes of motion. I really think the posterior lunge is a key indicator of, as I lunge backwards, the first thing that hits the ground is the first ray. And so I really want to see if they can load through the first ray. And that's a big one with our guys. A lot of guys grow super tall quick, and that gets a plantar ray, first ray, then they really lack dorsiflexion. And that's the last thing that leaves the ground in sprinting. And so what can happen is, because it is rigid, that front hip will get really tight. So as I lunge backwards, can you dorsiflex the first ray? Can I lengthen and load through the front hip? And can I stabilize my torso, right? Can I create a swing pattern that looks at the anterior chain reaction?
That's interesting because, with the, just for the listening audience, you mentioned a back lunge, and for most people, what they think of as a back lunge is taking one leg and stepping backwards, but the weight stays distributed on the leg that didn't step. They stay loaded over that front leg, they reach back and they stand up. But the back lunge we're talking about is where you take a foot and a leg and you step back and you bring your weight back onto it, almost sitting back into it. So that's that's one of those moves that you don't see very often exhibited or trained in a weight room or strength conditioning setting, because I don't know if people really understand the significance of 60 degrees of dorsiflexion at that first metatarsal phalangeal joint, that big toe joint there, and the importance of how that plays in hip function, allowing it to open up, or if it isn't, if there's too much, then the hip's not going to open up enough. And if there's not enough, it's not going to open up enough. There's that Goldilocks spot. So I'm really glad you say that and pick that lunge out. But here's the one thing that you've got my head scratching. As strength conditioning specialists, this is supposed to be a hands-off industry, as personal trainers and whatnot. But you kind of hear that at times, like, what is the job role or responsibility of strength coaches? And I kind of have to just put that little bullet point off to the side and go, how can we not put our hands on our clients, our athletes, our whatever you want to call them? If we're affecting the body, they may need some encouragement here or there. We're not necessarily manipulating, right? We're just assessing and getting an understanding what their body needs. Do you find any kind of in your level of the industry, you probably don't get any pushback, but do you ever get conversations with people about that?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And so I'll share another story with you, and we're going to rewind back to that first story with Gary. And I said to Gary, he was teaching me this manual mobilization of the foot. And I said, Gary, I'm not so sure if I should do this. And he's like, why? And I was like, well, I'm not a physical therapist, and I'm not an athletic trainer. And he goes, well, at that time, he's like, do you have someone else that can do it? And I was like, I don't think so. And he goes, well, here's your choice, buddy. Like, either you learn to do it or your athlete's going to suffer. And so I ventured into really taking this seriously, and spent some time with him understanding joint mobilizations, but he has a component to AFS that's called functional manual reaction, right? Where you're either slowing a bone down in real or relative motion, or you're speeding a bone up to get the chain reaction that you want out of the pelvis. And so there's a couple pieces to this question. Number one, I don't think the word strength coach actually does our industry justice anymore. We have a lot of different tools in our toolbox to be able to help increase performance for our athletes or clients. Strength is one component to that, right? But there's mobility and stability, there's balance and coordination. There's a lot of other characteristics that have to be developed. And according to whoever's standing in front of you, you want to go into the toolbox and use maybe a little bit more of one than the other.
Good.
Right. And so, but the word strength coach is giving it the connotation that we're about one thing, and that's lifting weights and getting stronger. That's only one component. And so I wish that somehow the name of that position could evolve, and I don't know what it really looks like. But I don't think it does it justice. And if I could teach, like I just got through sharing with you, though, that we value people that have great manual skills. Now, there was a long stretch in my career where I did a lot of the soft tissue. I did a lot of the manual mobilizations, but now I might have the best team in the country around me. And I'd probably pick that fight with anybody. That's how confident I am in the group of people that are around. And so I don't need to do those things, right? Because we've created a system that has them. But I would encourage people out there that if you don't have that system around you, you should learn it, right? Like, it's all about helping people be better. And if you don't have the skill set, or not in an environment that has those skill sets, then you should learn them, because you're going to help people be better. And you're going to deal with the criticism of some people saying, well, you're not a physical. You're right, I'm not a physical, but I'm a person that I can learn this skill, and I'm going to do my best to try to help people be better through it. And that's how I navigated that transition in those crossroads when I got to it. It's actually a great question, though.
Well, I appreciate the answer too. Yes. Yeah, I think you're right. I have a hard time when people ask, hey, what do you do? I don't have a title. There's nothing that can truly encompass and describe what it is that we do. And I think personal trainer or strength coach is too limiting in that regard.
I agree. Yeah.
So okay, we're getting near the end here, and we didn't even really bring up your role as vice president of player performance for the LA Clippers. I'm just curious. Are you liking it? Do you like this position? Do you really wish you were back in the trenches, or do you like being kind of the navigator and the leader in this?
You know what? There are some days that I miss coaching, but overall, I really felt like this was the next evolution in. I really love the performance side and understanding performance, and so this new position has been it's provided an amazing growth trajectory for me in my career. I've always felt like I've had the ability to take a group of people and pull them. The one thing that I've loved about being in this business, it's about team. And I've been influenced through some great coaches that have taught me how to help a group of people pull together. So I really like that piece. I really like the organization that I work for through the ownership and the leadership group. Big growth mindset people. what are we doing to get better? And so to work with an organization like that, and then I've talked to you about the team of people that we have, I feel like we have the best group of performance individuals in the NBA. And truth be known, I would put them up against anybody in the world because of how we function as a unit. And it's not always that way in the performance world, that there's a lot of egos that can come in the room. And so in this position, there's a lot of things that you learn that you start to value, right? You value, like I really value people that are connectors. They can connect with people, right? They love this, and they have a way to connect with people. Not everybody can connect with people, but I value people that are super competent. They love what they do. They've developed a skill set over their lives, that have separated themselves from. They're high performers, right? They want to continually get better. And then I value competitive people, people that winning and losing matters. And in our business, it all comes down to whether you win or lose is how we get judged. And so those are the big things that I really value as a leader in the space. And so to answer your question, I'm really digging this new part of my career. And it's just allowed me to grow exponentially in 3 years. And because of the group of people around me, I can't wait to get up in the morning and go to work. And I haven't even mentioned our players. We got really good players too. So I'm working for a spectacular organization that I think has allowed my transition to be the best it could possibly be.
What an amazing gift. What a wonderful way to wake up in the morning. I'm so happy that there's people like that and like yourself. Definitely. And I can't thank you enough for coming on here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you, Rocky. I appreciate the invitation, and anytime I could share stories with people or talk training, I'm all for it. So I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come on with you today.
And that brings this episode of the Zealous Podcast to a close. Thank you, Todd Wright, for coming on. And for those that haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please take a moment and just do that. Tell some friends about the show, and we'll see you next week.